Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us in today's panel webinar, New Opportunities for People with Disabilities Post-COVID-19. My name is Yusra Benjeloun, Administrative Coordinator and Projects Manager with the Work Wellness Institute, and I'll be co-moderating today's webinar. We would like to thank our academic team and our 9 founding partner organizations in the Harnessing Talent project. Harnessing Talent Alliance for Recruiting and Retaining Canadians with Disabilities and Mental Health Challenges is a 3-year project funded by Employment and Social Development Canada. This webinar is made possible through the support of ESDC, as well as donations and memberships to WWI. We thank our advisory committee and speakers who contribute to this webinar series. We're honored to welcome our presenters, Dr. Michael Landry, Shawn Duraff, and Jamie Miller-Dixon. Also with us today, our co-moderator for this webinar, Maureen Han. Maureen has been the President and CEO of the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, CCRW, since 2012. CCRW is the only national organization with the sole vision of equitable and meaningful employment for people with disabilities, in operation for over 40 years. Under Maureen's leadership, CCRW has been an increase in direct program service throughout Canada, as well as a more transparent streamlining of understanding the business case of hiring a person with disability. Maureen was appointed to the COVID-19 Disability Advisory Group during the COVID-19 pandemic and remains on the Minister Disability Advisory Group. Maureen, it's always great to see you. I will hand it over to you to introduce our experts.
Yusra, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. It's exciting to be here with this incredible panel that you've got today, and it's my complete pleasure to be able to introduce you. We're going to start the presentation today with Dr. Michael Landry. Michael Landry is a professor in the Department of Orthopaedic Surgery, the Duke Global Health Institute, and the Duke-Margolis Center for Health Policy at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, USA. Before this, Dr. Landry spent 7 years as Division Chief of the Duke Doctor of Physical Therapy Division, where he successfully led an important rebuilding of the program that is now grown into one of the top physical therapy programs in the United States. Prior to receiving his doctoral degree, he held clinical and senior management positions within the private rehabilitation sector in Ontario, Canada, and within international humanitarian aid and development agencies. Dr. Landry is a health policy and health services researcher, where his area of study is the policy implication of the gap between available supply, financial and human resources, and increasing demand for rehabilitation and health services across the continuum of care. He's a past president of the Canadian Physiotherapy Association and a former career scientist at the Ontario Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. He lectures widely on the policy and political dynamics of rehabilitation and is a provocative advocate for the moral, ethical, and economic necessity to ensure accessible and affordable rehabilitation services across the continuum of high, middle, and low-income countries. Our next 2 presenters will be presenting together. Our first is Shawn Duraff. Shawn Duraff is a research director with the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation, SRDC. His research at SRDC over the past 2 decades has covered a wide variety of topics related to employment, training, social income security, and community economic development. From 2012 to 2017, he held the position of research coordinator for the BC Centre for Employment Excellence, a division of SRDC. He was responsible for overseeing the centre's research program to address the knowledge and development needs of the employment service sector and the employer community in BC on issues related to employment program and practices. In his current role, Mr. Duraff is leading the development, management, and evaluation of large-scale projects that are examining innovative approaches to improving employment service delivery and enabling job seekers to find good jobs. His project portfolio involves research in a variety of thematic areas, including connecting people with disabilities to employment, supporting employers in achieving their diversity, equity, and inclusion objectives, providing essential skills training to displaced workers and career development practitioners, and measuring the impact of social purpose organization. He holds an MA in Public Administration from Carleton University. Presenting today along with Shawn is Jamie Miller-Dixon. Jamie is the principal of McLeod Silver HR Business Partners based in Vancouver, BC, and an inclusive workforce consultant with BC Partners in Workforce Innovation. Now in its 7th year, BC WIN is a unique recruitment service that helps BC employers connect to the talent pool of people with disabilities and diverse abilities. Jamie has an extensive human resource background of over 30 years, specializing in workforce diversity and inclusion, recruitment, training, and HR startup. Her experience spans multiple industries. She has developed and delivered diversity training programs for both public and private sector employers. Recently, she co-authored Untapped Talent's B2B Guide on Innovative Recruitment and Retention, a resource for employers on how to easily adapt each stage at the recruitment, onboarding, and retention process to be able to hire more people with disabilities in their business. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Landry for your presentation.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Maureen. And I apologize for that intro that you had to suffer through for me. Next time I'm just going to write sort of a guy who's trying to dismantle ableism in an ableist world. But thank you for the kind words. Hi, everyone. Really glad to be here today. I'm going to start us off. And I will be talking a little bit from a very macro level perspective of disability, employment, sort of a socio-epidemiologic front end of the presentation. And then my colleagues, of course, are going to go into much more granularity, which is going to be super interesting. So I'll start off, and let's just see if I can get my slides going here. Let's go to the first one. Yeah, so this is where I usually get my greatest applause from students, when I start with the conclusions. So I thought I would just maybe start with 3 points that I would like to communicate today in the 15 minutes or so that I have. First one, and of course we were probably quote unquote preaching to the choir here. Those of you who are attending are probably here because you're interested in this field, but and you'll know some of the details, but I do want to talk a little bit about the number and percentages of people who live with a disability on a global perspective. I'll argue, based on some of our own research, around the diaspora of high, middle, and low-income countries, but I'll also argue that low-income communities in Canada, or in my case, the United States, often are in the same environmental conundrum as low-income countries, as you might think about. And so this is called the middle-income trap. And so I'll maybe make a point or two about that. The second point I'd like to communicate is around universal design features, and there's a typo there, I apologize. And the fact that universal design features helped everyone. And I think the pandemic has helped us understand this in quite elaborate ways. I'll make a point or two about that. I'll end here by talking about some of our research that we're doing in North Carolina regarding the disproportionate impact on people with disabilities, and end with a point that I'd like to argue around the need for greater equity, including around employment for people with disabilities as a mainstream factor inside of our pandemic response patterning, which has not, I don't believe, has been as robust as it should have been. Right, okay, so disability in the overall population. What you see here, there is a recent, fairly seminal paper that was published by the head of rehabilitation and disability at the World Health Organization, Dr. Cieza, where she and colleagues looked at a variety of different features inside of something called the Global Burden of Disease Study, And these are public administrative data files. And anyway, she used, and her colleagues used some of these files. We've used the files as well to drill down in different ways. But in general, what we see here is something like this. Which is really, if you looked at different types of disability related, the vast majority become musculoskeletal in nature, but that hides another story. The full gamut, the full continuum of disability is fairly wide-ranging, and so sometimes when we look at it from an epidemiologic perspective, it hides a lot of important stories. So, for instance, we know, based on recent publications, that there are about 1 billion people in the world who live with lifelong disabilities. These are not short-term people with short-term disabilities. These are people with lifelong disabilities. Think intellectual disability, think people with other forms of neurodegenerative conditions. The numbers are growing, though. That's another point I wanted to make. It doesn't, you don't see it in this kind of slide, but we do know that if you looked at the global burden of disease files over the last 20 years, we see a greater proportion and greater absolute number of people who live with lifelong disabilities. The fastest growth or pace of growth is in low-income countries. So while we see the pattern across all countries of all economic levels, we see a faster growth rate inside of low-income countries, low and middle-income countries. Also, which is important there, is that while we're seeing growth in the rates of disability in low and middle-income countries, these are also the countries that are also seeing the highest and quickest pace of population growth overall. So you can see that all of a sudden the argument is becoming not just, we should think about disability, but it is part of the genetic makeup of a population now. So it's no longer just something for wealthier countries to address, but certainly it is across the continuum. I'm personally, what kind of keeps, as we say, it keeps me up at night, is thinking about how, and we're doing a variety of different types of studies around the pandemic response in Bangladesh, Jordan, and West Africa. And we, in these, well, in particular in parts of West Africa, which are considered low-income countries, we're seeing a fairly disproportionate impact of the pandemic response on people with disabilities. Think isolation, think pandemic planning, and not really being mainstreaming. Thinking of, digital transformation of work has been disproportionately affected, the people with disabilities. That's in low-income countries. I suspect, and we have a hypothesis, and we're unpacking this right now in North Carolina, that some of those conditions we see in low and middle-income countries we'll also see in low-income countries in Canada and in the United States. So it's not an issue of them, it's an issue of in our own backyard. Right. Let's see here. Now, some of these you will have probably been familiar. This is the infographic that the millennials at WHO and everywhere else have been making. So this is a really good one. It talks a little bit about cutting the data. But the point I want to raise here is we see that, 1 billion people, that's probably a very gross estimate. I think the numbers are going to be quite a bit larger than that. Now, we kind of think about this slide here is to, again, place a little underline around low-income settings. So again, I want to make the point that it is not necessarily among low-income countries. We're seeing, and this is called the middle-income trap, where we have countries such as Canada, British Columbia as a province, and pockets of very high levels of poverty. And we see that the disability rates and the employment rates in these pockets in a wealthier population, overall population, are often masked by the overall economic productivity. I think we'll probably start to see this in Alberta fairly soon, given some of the economic changes that we're seeing. But nonetheless, I think it's important at least to put it out there that, that things or sort of the population level indicators are showing us and starting to peel back some of the onions around where people with lifelong disabilities live and what kind of conditions under which they can thrive. And it's masked sometimes by the macro level. So that's a little bit of the background. Universal design features, again, something that you all I'm sure will know, but this has become a really important aspect of the pandemic response. It also is a little bit of background. As a physical therapist, I've worked for the last 20 years in disaster zones, in infectious disease outbreaks around the world. And we only, I would say, in the last 5 to 8 years have we seen a real mainstreaming of disability as part of disaster response. But what is important here is that we talk a little bit about the difference of equity and equality. And policymakers, in general, think about it from a equality perspective. Let's provide CERB to everybody, or let's provide it to, a sort of a blunt object here. But that misses the point a lot with people with disabilities, which is why we talk about equity. And so equity, of course, is the middle picture you see here, where we would provide a different level of support based on people's needs. So equity, I think, becomes a real mediating factor towards employment. Some of the research we're doing is identifying that people with disabilities are really struggling with this digital transformation of work towards mostly online. Think of persons who live with complete blindness, people with mobility, challenges. So I think we're going to have to start thinking a little bit more around equity as really one of these mediating factors. There are 7 principles inside of universal design. I just want to sort of, place this in front of us here, and maybe we can come back around on it. But in a very powerful interview we did with one of our participants in a study, he said, and I'll paraphrase, we don't want special treatment, and we've heard this before over the last many, many years, but what we want is an equal footing in terms of the pandemic response. And he was a gentleman in this particular moment, but he had suggested, well, we don't want, so in the United States, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we don't want to use law to change this. We want to use equity, because universal design helps everybody. It helps everybody equally. And whether that's from a physical performance perspective or an intellectual approach. So I think we should start using, or at least, using policy based on what we think and what we're pontificating upon, which includes universal design features. I'm going to pick up the pace here because I mentioned to Jamie and Shawn that I'm really just the warm-up act here, for the real good stuff that's coming. Economic and labor laws are just simply not enough, in my opinion. This is what's been shown from policy perspectives. You can say we're going to have laws and policies that are going to enforce and push people into, accepting persons with disability in holistic employment settings. But in my opinion, in our research, in most occasions, this is it falls short of where we want to be. It has to be integrated into the DNA of an approach, which again, during a pandemic, I think we have a moment in time where we can actually pivot and make a change. As they say, you don't want to let a good pandemic go to waste. And so I would say that in this case. This is probably my last slide here, and I just want to share a little bit around some of our initial findings. So what we are seeing, at least here in North America, or in North Carolina, is that the pandemic has had a really important and disproportionate impact on persons with intellectual disabilities. So in particular, we have, and we're in the process of analyzing our data, but we have stories and we have recounts of people who just simply cannot pivot and work at home. Most of you today, I certainly am, in my basement office, and that's because I'm fairly privileged and I can easily do that pivot. And my type of employment allows me to do it, but that's not the case for everyone. And so even from an issue of transport to and from work or a work setting, this has been a challenge. The assumption around digital transformation is equally effective for everyone has been a gross misunderstanding of persons with disabilities and universal design. And probably the third is that, during lockdown procedures, people with disabilities have much less ability in general to be able to mobilize in the same ways we might. Some of our participants are recounting how in many ways they've become the target of unfortunate scams. And so it just becomes a really difficult scenario, and we are definitely seeing a disproportionate impact on them. How do you solve it? Well, you solve it, I think, by again using the situation we have now as a pivot point. How can we pivot out of this and create the right environment so that we have universal design, so that everyone has equity towards a more holistic approach to employment. Gainful and meaningful employment is not just around a financial burden or a financial discussion. It really is around the worth of the individual. And so I'll end there with saying thank you so much for listening, and let's pass it over to Jamie and Shawn, and then certainly happy to answer questions at the end. But thank you.
Great.
Hi, okay. Sorry, do you want me to start, Maureen, or do you?
Sorry, I got a little bit like, oh my goodness, are you waiting for me? No, please go ahead and start. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Landry, that was excellent.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you, Michael. That was a really great sort of contextual piece, and I love the way you've talked about not wanting to waste a pandemic like this. And we, you know, what we want to do today is present some results from a small study that we've conducted here as part of a larger initiative that we're doing here in BC. That's, you know, that is really moving in that direction and working with employers to really provide good jobs to people with disabilities. And in the context of this pandemic, understanding how we can continue to maintain our objectives around, you know, diversity and inclusion, not losing sight of that, while we find ways in which we can meet the needs of people with disabilities wherever they're at, however they're affected. Before we get going, we just thought we'd make this a little bit more interactive, and the team will be launching a poll. And what we just want to hear from you is, we just want to see how what we're presenting today aligns with what you might be seeing in your organization. So for those of you who are either supporting or employing people with disabilities, we have a poll that will be asking you about what you're seeing in terms of employment rates within your own organizations. So what Maureen's given a good introduction for both of us as presenters and our initiative. What we're presenting here today is actually something that we never planned to do, and it came about really as a result of the pandemic. And it's a small little survey that we've conducted, and we're using the results of the survey to inform how we're working with our partners here in BC. But we thought, you know, that this is providing some really interesting insights into what might be going on for people with disabilities right now. And so we're using opportunities like this webinar today to share out those results. We'll be publishing the results on our website because we think it's important to share this out, as there's so little information right now that's really getting into this important topic.
Okay, Shawn, I'm seeing the results here. Did you want me to share it with you now?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
So 50% of the participants indicated less than 20%. 17% of participants indicated between 20 and 40%, and 33 indicated it was not applicable to them.
Okay. Okay, well, that'd be great to sort of bring that back up in the discussion afterwards as you hear what we have to share about what we're seeing from our study here. So our team here at SRDC is a national research organization headquartered out of Ottawa with the office here in Vancouver. We've been working for over 20 years in the area of employment, workforce development, health, and education. Back in 2013, we launched the BC Centre for Employment Excellence through funding from the province, and this center was really to support the transformation that was going on here in BC around employment service delivery, as many of you are aware, with the launch of the new Work BC model. And we had the privilege of providing research supports to that model and to the broader community as the sector was really going under quite a significant transformation. At that time, there was a group of service providers who were getting together and talking about how they might do a better job supporting employers. There was lots of initiatives going on, and it really wasn't very well coordinated. There was a lot of duplication, and there were also gaps. And so through these discussions, our center was invited to partake, and we actually applied for and received funding to conduct a 3-year pilot study where we launched BC Partners in Workforce Innovation. This project was funded initially by the province, and we've recently, over the last 2 years, received funding through the federal government from the Opportunities Fund to continue this work and expand it to a broader group of employers, and focus on supporting at minimum 100 job seekers in terms of new employment opportunities. So SRDC, as a research manager, we're managing this project, and our partner here is represented by Jamie and her team at McLeod Silver, and they're a team of HR experts who have been doing this recruitment piece for a while and really understand the disability piece. And they are that liaison between employers and service providers. So BC Wind is a unique approach in that the key client is the employer, not the job seeker. It's a demand-based approach. So we start with employers and the job openings that they have, and then we connect with a broad network of service providers who refer candidates for these placements. These candidates are screened by our team and then referred on where appropriate for those positions. And the team is there to help support the employer through that entire process, prepare them for onboarding, and then to help ensure retention as well. It's about providing career-oriented opportunities. These are not just, make work positions. These are real career opportunities where the employer is looking to the candidate to grow and succeed within their organization. Through our current funding, we're looking at outcomes of at least a year. We hope that candidates will stay on for much longer than that. So this HR approach has worked really well. Think of it like as a recruitment model. It's worked really well for employer partners. They get that kind of model. And it's also worked really well for the job seekers who've been referred. And we have been seeing retention rates at about 90%, and that's been pretty consistent throughout the course of this. And we're still seeing high retention rates even during the pandemic. So the aim of the research component is to really understand how these enhanced employer supports and supported work experiences can enable more BC employers to achieve their diversity, equity, inclusion goals. And it's really about facilitating these long-term career opportunities and connecting people in who may not otherwise have that opportunity into excellent positions with some amazing employers here in BC. So we're currently working with 11 employer partners, and we have a huge network of service partners. I think we say 98, I think it's probably even bigger than that. We have essentially an email list, and it goes out to hundreds of people every time there's a new opportunity that comes about.
Great. Thanks, Shawn. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what motivated the research that was undertaken. So we were starting to notice that COVID had a pretty major impact on employment, and especially amongst populations of people who were more vulnerable due to pre-existing conditions, lower skill sets, are working in sectors that were hardest hit by the shutdowns. So while we were our own team worked through the initial shock period when COVID first had an impact on us, we began to notice a fairly significant decline in the number of referrals that our service partners were referring to us for opportunities that were being circulated in the spring. And, most of the employers we worked with also were impacted in terms of shutting down and redeploying. We'll talk about that a little later. But we could see that we were launching whatever recruitment campaigns we were launching. We could see they had really high open rates, but we weren't getting referrals. So we were also hearing anecdotally that people had started to opt out of seeking employment for their own very personal reasons. So we thought we would poll our service partners to gain a better understanding of the specific issues that were preventing people from being willing or able to work during the pandemic. And these results that Shawn's going to share with you next will have an impact on how we moved forward, and also some of our other service partners. The labor market data just wasn't there on the pandemic response, didn't include information on people with disabilities and the challenges they were facing. So we undertook that research to identify what could be impacting that. And Shawn's going to share that with you next.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So the goal of the survey was really to capture real-time responses from service providers in terms of what they were seeing with respect to their clients. It was really to help us understand, what was going on, what were some of those barriers for people with disabilities in terms of being ready or willing to work at this time. I just want to be very mindful here that we're presenting a survey that was completed by a select group of service providers here in BC over a specific time period. There was no real sampling frame. It was just really trying to engage as many organizations out there as possible to hear from them about what might be going on with their clients or their employees. So I think of it as a qualitative study in terms of just it's providing some insights, but it shouldn't be interpreted as what's going on in terms of job seekers as a whole across BC. But we hope that, in terms of conversations and sort of reflections from other data sources, we can kind of get a sense of how this aligns with what truly might be going on for people with disabilities right now. So the survey was sent out in late 2020 starting with our service partner network. We engaged with the province. We asked people to pass it along to other organizations that might have people who might be serving people with disabilities at this time. And it was really about understanding what was going on for their clients. So we're not hearing from people with disabilities themselves. As Jamie was saying, that data itself was not directly available. For us, this was the best way to get this information as quickly as possible. We had 20 service providers and social enterprises responding. So in our network, we do have like the Work BCs and CLBC funded organizations that are serving people with disabilities. And we also have a number of social enterprises that provide those wraparound supports as they employ people as they provide employment or training to people within their organizations. And some of those are focused on people with disabilities, and some are focused on more broader disadvantaged populations. So with those 20, what you're seeing are results from those 20, those organizations, and each of them had a varying range of people that they support. So you're seeing those numbers here. So it ranges from 11 to 85. And so what we thought we could do here is present the results in terms of the people who are represented in these results. So that, by our estimation, that amounted to 556 clients. So once again, it's the clients who are being served, and it's the extent to which those organizations have been able to engage people through their services where we're seeing these results. So I just want to caution you with respect to that. So in terms of the service providers, our 20 service providers, here you're seeing the results in terms of weighted by the number of clients they serve. And you can see that for the most part, almost 80% of our organizations who responded to the survey provided some sort of employment readiness programming. That might be training, that might be other types of job supports, or that might be actual employment and kind of onboarding through a supported work situation. 36% provided some kind of social enterprise employment or work experience. Just over a quarter represented Work BC organizations. And then we had other range of supports, including assistive technologies, mental health, rehabilitation services, and IPS, individual placement and support. So when we asked the respondents to talk about, identify how their clients or employees might be disengaging from employment during the pandemic, we found out that we had 93% of clients being in a position where they're not wanting to accept or return to available employment opportunities. So they might be engaging in employment, they might be offered opportunities to take on a position or pursue an opportunity, and they've decided at this time to not do that. 89% have indicated that they are not currently seeking employment. And then over half are no longer engaging with their organization. That might be a temporary situation where they've completely kind of disappeared, or they might have actually dropped off their roles completely. So it seems that during COVID, clients are not fully disengaged from services, but we are still seeing that high level of disengagement. That is a real issue. So the real question is, what is going on with people who are not represented here? What might be their situation? What might be holding them back from actually wanting to to meet with a work BC job counselor, go into work with a social enterprise and that sort of thing. So when we asked about reasons that their clients or employees might be indicating in terms of why they're not engaging with employment at this time, there's a few reasons that really stood out. Almost half indicated that they had decreased motivation, that they're seeing decreased motivation among their clients. This could be either due to stresses or anxieties due to COVID. Michael was talking about transportation issues. It could be issues around going to work, on transit. It could be about working in a workplace in close proximity to other employees or with customers. It could be about expectations about, the precarity of that position. 41% indicated that they had their own personal health concerns related to COVID-19 that might, the situations that might predispose them to being at higher risk. 41% were worried about exposure to COVID in the workplace. 38% were worried about exposure in terms of public transit. 28%, so just over a quarter, indicated that there were family concerns. And we know that for many people with disabilities, particularly intellectual disabilities, there might be family members who are very much involved in their decision-making around going to work. And those are somehow a factor in terms of their decision right now. Similarly, 28% were worried about job security in this time. There might be a situation where there's an opportunity that might be available. They might be concerned about going into work, starting a position, and the implications that might have in terms of being able to hold on to that position longer term, making that commitment. And another 23% indicated that they're worried about their own family responsibilities and how this might impact, how their employment might impact on their family. We were really surprised to see such a low percentage indicating that either the loss of CERB, so the relief benefits that were available through the government, or their current disability assistance were factors in that decision. So that for us, that was quite a low percentage. So it's really these other factors that are having a much greater impact in terms of what's going on for people right now, at least in terms of what we're seeing. And we're really interested to hear from you how that kind of aligns with what you might be seeing in your own organizations. Jamie? Oh, Jamie, you're muted.
Excellent. Thanks, Shawn. So when we asked for further insights from our service partners about their clients' disengagement from employment, it really highlighted four main themes, and here they are up on the screen. That's safety, anxiety, vulnerability, and uncertainty. And a perfect example given by one of the service partners is that clients who already face multiple barriers seem to demonstrate less resilience and more anxiety around COVID. And then for employers, another said that the shifting labor market has added an additional complex layer to most businesses, and that physical distancing, PPEs, having to think about another layer of accommodation was very challenging to employers, especially early on. The results from the survey suggested to us that additional supports were needed for both employers and job seekers, and the results suggest that the pandemic has exacerbated the gap that was already there for job seekers with disabilities and employers. Yeah, so here's the key lessons learned from the survey. The key lessons is it really highlighted the need to adapt to the reality of COVID. There are new realities here. It's not just business as usual, and it won't be for a while. Employers required further supports to adjust their practices and their approaches to engage people with disabilities during the pandemic. And the persistence of the pandemic required understanding how job seekers engage in employment currently and shift to longer term thinking. Concerns about personal safety and job security present real barriers to employment for vulnerable job seekers, so need to take extra steps to address deeper underlying concerns of job seekers with disabilities. But it does present an opportunity to change approaches and prepare job seekers for in-demand positions now for when recruitment resumes and people are ready and able to get back to work. So it is an opportunity. It does present an opportunity at this stage to start thinking about how do we start to prepare people for those opportunities when the economy opens up? Yeah, so for us, what we saw, we looked at this as what we saw pre-COVID, onset of COVID, and currently. So pre-COVID, I think most sectors across the country were experiencing pretty major workforce shortages. And for us, what we noticed in BC WIN, there was a really high level of employer engagement and real significant momentum around hiring people with disabilities. So pre-COVID, lots of opportunities, lots of momentum, key employer engagement was really high. And then as we saw the onset of COVID, we had major layoffs with the employers that we were working with, shifted to more remote working opportunities, and most organizations went to no hiring in non-essential for non-essential positions. With exception of some of the retail employers that we work with, for example, London Drugs, they actually hired more people because of the cleaning requirements and the distancing requirements in the store. But most of the other businesses we work with went to no hiring opportunities. And so there was a decrease in hiring people with disabilities. You know, we're almost at a year. And so currently, you know, one of our larger employers and large employers of people with disabilities is the tourism and hospitality sector. Think of, you know, hotels, restaurants. That sector's decimated, and will stay that way for a while. So we don't anticipate that those large employers will be resuming their hiring of people with disabilities anytime soon. But what we're noticing is opportunities are opening up slowly, and we're returning to a heightened return to inclusivity. I'll share with you in a moment just some of the things that we've been doing. So that's helped us. You know, we're in a really unique position given our relationship with our employers and the kinds of organizations that we work with to take some action based on the survey results. And so while we continue our recruitment and retention for those organizations that have opened up and are starting to recruit, we're building in some additional activities that we started to use. We thought, how could we pivot? How can we shift our activities to support these new realities for the time being? So we looked at opportunities to build and increase capacity with our employers, many of whom were deployed working from home, looking, you know, still going to be retained in their organizations. So what could we do? So we looked at providing training for hiring managers on inclusive hiring and retention, and offering that training either within the organizations or sort of en masse through sessions we were hosting over Zoom. Also looking at how can we work with HR teams and help them understand a bigger picture around inclusive hiring and retention, and ways that they can actually influence some of the hiring managers. So that worked really well with the organizations we were working with. Some of the things that we're also undertaking from now until June is conducting accessibility reviews of the current recruitment and retention practices that are used in organizations that we work with. Almost all of them wanted that, so that was really great. So that when they're ready to resume hiring, and they will get back to resuming hiring, maybe not to levels pre-COVID, but they will get back to hiring large amounts of employees again. How can we prepare them to be able to do that during the pandemic and following? Well, we saw a drop-off of opportunities and maybe some hesitancy in engaging this talent pool. We're actually starting to see a higher level of engagement now. We also looked at how can we help organizations, you know, be more welcoming of candidates with diverse abilities, and so helping them adjust their career pages, making sure there's an active offer there, looking at job descriptions. Do we really need all of that information, all of those requirements that we've always asked for in a job description that hasn't been changed in 5-10 years? And looking at it, helping them adjust their behavior-based interviews and working with HR teams so that, again, we increase their capacity to be able to do that on an ongoing basis. So yeah, we've been providing hiring manager training. We're actually in the process of developing an e-learning series based on that Untapped Talent B2B guide, but also based on our learnings in BC Win. We found that particularly for people with diverse cognitive abilities, creating some visuals around, you know, what is a day in the life of a stocking associate at London Drugs, show some of the visual requirements of positions so that it might be used as a tool to attract more candidates in the future. One of the cool things we were doing is looking at, you know, the reality with some of our employers, they pre-COVID were not open to remote working opportunities, right? There's a concern around, you know, productivity levels and, you know, will people actually be doing the work? But, you know, some pretty hard realities when the entire workforce is deployed to work from home. And what was a surprise is that productivity levels actually increased and not decreased. And in fact, the problem employees in terms of performance and productivity were still problem employees working from home. So the ones that were on site, not delivering to their full capacity, we're still doing the same thing from home. So what it did for especially the larger organizations, you know, ICBC, Van City, some of the larger companies that we work with, going forward, they see themselves providing remote work opportunities, right? Which is really amazing because they're a large employer and provide services across the province. And so there are opportunities for some remote working arrangements where, especially as Michael was saying early on, you know, in communities where transit isn't great, where people don't have access to a lot of opportunities, maybe some folks are not in a position to be able to leave home, but have the skills and abilities to be trained to do call center opportunities, for example, which is something that we're actually delivering now with BCAA, Van City, and ICBC. So helping them identify opportunities for remote working arrangements, and then what do we need to do to support that, either through technology. And finally, one of the best and most fun things we've been doing over the last few weeks is developing customized online training cohorts for people with disabilities to prepare for jobs that are expected to be in demand as recruitment resumes. And those jobs are all call center based. Some can be done remotely and some can be done on site. So we've actually got about 68 people who went through that training, and we're in the process this week of making those recommendations out to the employers. So, you know, it did present some really interesting opportunities for us. And again, I'm noticing where our recruitment team, our inclusive workforce consulting team is noticing that there is a recognition that the organizations that started down this journey a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and that they clearly didn't want to leave all of the progress that they've made behind. They did not want to leave people with disabilities behind, and are putting effort into ensuring that they continue, not stop, their initiative around inclusive hiring. So we're really looking forward to all of these next steps and seeing what it produces. And Shawn and Laura, our colleague who's part of the research team, will be researching how, you know, what these additional efforts produced in terms of outcomes and results. And I'm sure we'll look forward to sharing that with you in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I've just posted the URL of our project website. So we invite you to go there and check out our employer partners and our service partner network to learn more about our initiative. BC Win is currently funded until June 2021, and we're really grateful for the federal government's flexibility and as well as the additional funds to support these additional initiatives to really enhance results for both our employers and our job seekers who are being referred to these positions during this time. So it's a really amazing opportunity to provide some research about what works in a situation that is unique as a situation we're in right now. So thank you so much. We really hope this has stimulated some thinking on your part, and we look forward to your questions.
Wow, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for your time and for your knowledge and your expertise and your leadership in this area. I know that I was busy taking lots of notes myself. So there are lots of questions in the chat box, so I'm gonna get to those now. So the first one is to Michael. In your opinion, what are the best practices for employers within the recruitment process to make it clear that they are open and willing to accommodate those applicants with a disability, i.e. going beyond the general statement of a job posting that says we welcome applications from all abilities and those needing accommodations, please inform the recruiter. So actually maybe that's a question for the full panel.
Yeah, that's well, I'll share some thoughts, but you know, my current role, I don't have to meet you know, payroll at the end of every month, so I'm not an employer, but I'll share what I think. And the first is, at least in workforce theory, the best signal of a thought or a value is to have others who have lived it communicate. It's almost like a wrong word here, but like have disciples or cheerleaders out there saying, hey, you know what? This company, this is what they did, worked really well, and it wasn't just during the employment, it actually went across the trajectory. So I think word of mouth becomes really important. Number two, it's you know, I think some of the other areas of diversity inclusion, I might suggest the LGBTQ community in particular, with sort of, you know, symbolic symbols that you can put on your website, essentially to say, hey, listen, we're open for business here, you know, and allyship. So at least here at Duke University, there's a little tag that you can put on your email or even your department, and it's around LGBTQ allyship, and it says I'm an ally. So it kind of feels a little bit like like signaling here, virtue signaling, but I think, you know, when it's followed up with meaning, then it actually makes sense. Those are two thoughts.
Excellent, thank you. Jamie or Shawn, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, if I could, yes. I think Michael's absolutely right, and it speaks to a business reputation as well. You know, what do you set your business up for to be known? And it's not enough just to put the statement out there, but do nothing to support it. So I think even having visuals on your website that depict diverse people, right, and that depict your community, that there's at least people with visible disabilities included on the career site. I think partnering too with trusted organizations that are going to get your business needs. They understand that you are the client and can refer candidates who are a good match to what your business culture is all about. Mm-hmm. And finally, I think if you have a goal for a respectful workplace culture, it is a lot easier for D&I to happen. Because who doesn't want to work for a respectful employer? Who doesn't want to be part of that type of culture? So respect is a goal that is something, if you don't have levels of respect in your workplace, this isn't going to work for you.
I would just add, there's so many resources out there to support employers right now. We joke about, you know, toolkits, and, you know, it seems like there's a new toolkit coming out all the time, and they're you know, employers can tap into so much in terms of establishing the business case, understanding how to recruit and retain people with disabilities. So I think that's an important piece, is for employers to sort of access those and understand that there's a lot of people out there who are willing to support and not just stand alongside, but also like help make this happen for them. So I think that's such an important piece. And I think it really speaks to being a better employer. I mean, it's not just about bringing new people into your workplace. It's recognizing people who are already there, who may have, you know, different situations going on. There's that intersectionality piece, I think, Michael, that you're speaking to some extent. And, you know, being a more inclusive employer just means you're a better employer, and you're going to reap these amazing benefits in terms of, you know, happier employees and people who want to stay with your organization for a longer period of time.
Yeah, and Just sitting here listening to the three of you answer that, I think that it's taking away little bits from each of what you've said, because, you know, Michael, you're talking about that kind of the sticker on the door, and we've used that analogy before with employers, because as Jamie and Shawn have said, if you put that sticker on your door, you better be ready for people with disabilities to walk through. Or in some cases roll through, right? Like, you better be ready for this, and if you're not ready for it, you can't put the sticker up on the door. So, so I think that that's I appreciate all of those comments. Over to over to Shawn or Jamie. But again, Michael, feel free to chime in. In the workplace, how can we ensure an equitable response for all workers? It's a big, heavy question, huh? Easy to answer.
Shawn, did you want to take this one?
I don't know. That's a really tough one. I think understanding who your workforce is, I think that's just an important piece of this. It's not just thinking about external, but also understanding where your current employees are at and creating that kind of environment about, you know, it's not just about putting out a survey and, you know, asking people to disclose, but what do you need to do to take those steps to be an employer that creates that environment where people feel comfortable disclosing, people feel comfortable speaking out about, you know, what they know and they don't know. A lot of the work that we're doing, you know, you engage the C-suite, you engage the leadership, but then the real work begins when you have the hiring managers and coworkers welcoming someone with diverse abilities in their workplace, understanding how you go about supporting a person who might be on the spectrum. You know, what can I say? What can I say? And there's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of preconceptions about that. And there's a lot of training as well to help you kind of walk through that and make that a much more comfortable situation. It's just, I think a lot of it is just about lowering those perceptions. And in the end, a lot of the concerns that people have about risk, you know, are really easily dissipated once you kind of get that knowledge.
Yeah, and I'll add to that as well. I think unconscious bias is still such a big elephant in the room, and it gets in the way. So organizations that are really committed to this and serious about this really would benefit from looking at some training in that area and really, you know, get those elephants in the room out on the table. We have an approach that we brought a group of our employers together for a day, and there were over 75 of them. And one of the things, we were addressing a number of challenges and opportunities and discussions, and one of the things that was really clear to us by the end of it, and we talk about it a lot, and we're actually promoting it in our training initiatives now, is that it really takes, we call it the 4 pillars, just because that's kind of catchy, right? The 4 pillars to inclusive hiring. And it starts with commitment, readiness, recruitment, and retention. So that there's an intentional effort on who's driving this. It can't just be the single HR person in an organization. It really has to be embraced by the leadership team or come from the top. And what are the things? So once you say, our goal is to have a workforce that reflects our community, who are our customers, right? Reflects customers. And what do we need to do to prepare our workforce in our organization to change? And that comes in under readiness. It's everything from physical accessibility to how do we prepare our hiring managers to hire differently, and then specific recruitment outreach, specific retention initiatives. So I'm not sure if that really answers the question or gets to the root of it, but I hope it does.
Well, it definitely answered a question that I had for later on. So so I think that you were a bit preemptive there, so that's excellent. Thanks. Michael, do you have anything to add to this question?
Well, you know, not much, but I will say, having moved from Canada to the southern United States, this, as it relates to in the last year with the events that have unfolded in the United States, really has brought to bear the level of unconscious bias that we all have, and it really depends on which game the employer wants to play. Are they playing the short game or the long game here? So in other words, is it a company that is trying to drive up its market cap to just, you know, be sold, or is it something that's a community that's going to be there for the long term? And I think on the same side as employers need to be more aware, potential employees having more competencies of which employer to reach out to is like, everybody's got to participate here somehow.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. Excellent point. And then back over to you, Michael. My next question is, can you expand on the universal design and 7 principles that you spoke about during your presentation?
Yes, well, sure. I mean, briefly, you can also just sort of, go and kind of unpack this, because there are, it's quite a deep theory in a political process, but it really talks, it places equity at its foremost. So for instance, rather than universities now, when you follow universal design, faculty, as an example, cannot jam in as much information on one slide as a human is possible. You can humanly do. So there are rules to follow. A certain number of points that should be made on, for instance, a slide. That any resource that's placed has to have, direct translation that's happening while we speak. And it has almost nothing to do with an individual who presents with a disability or an impairment, but it has everything to do with trying to normalize opportunity. So, for instance, if I have a processing, delay because of a traumatic brain injury, but yet I'm a lawyer, I should be able to attend a session like this and see a ticker tape, something on the bottom, so I can use multiple channels so that I, at the end of a 5-minute discussion, I'm at the same level as somebody who might not have that particular impairment. So conceptually, that's the point. The 7 principles that were on that wheel, again, we can go through each one of them, but they all have to do with ensuring that everyone has an equitable opportunity from an education perspective, but mostly an understanding perspective. How this applies inside of an employment environment, I think, is yet to be fully unpacked, fully determined. Maybe Jamie and Shawn, maybe you have something on that, but there should be, for instance, rules and principles that one would follow to ensure that everyone can perform the tasks at hand. Now, I will also say, before I pass it over, that I speak as though somehow in healthcare or in the academy that we've solved this problem. We're not even close. As an example, if you're in the university where I am at now, if you use a wheelchair, you cannot go to train yourself as a physician. You cannot come to medical school here if you use a wheelchair in the year 2021. So I say that with humility, saying that it hasn't been solved. It's an aspiration of where we need to get to, but we're far from it. Jamie?
You're a hard act to follow, Mike. No, I agree. I think, and especially that we are still in that aspirational stage. Some organizations, and they're noted for the work that they're doing. I think of Van City, for example, here in the Lower Mainland, done some amazing work in this area. And I know that Rick Hansen Foundation, I think, are with their accessibility reviews are addressing the universal design aspect to the extent that they can. But yeah, no, I agree with you entirely.
I think that it's interesting. Sorry, Shawn, did you have anything to add?
No, I think it's it's a top-down, bottom-up approach to this. We have organizations that are leading the way. We have, employers who are really showing the way. We also have legislation coming into play, and that's going to, come to bear in terms of federally regulated employers. We have the provinces and territories bringing in legislation as well. So I think employers know that they need to start to think about this because they're going to be impelled to, so they might as well help show the way and be exemplars of how best to do this.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say. I think that it's interesting is, the Accessible Canada Act, and of course BC is creating their Accessibility Act as well, and a couple of the provinces that have some weaker than others, but it has to be that balance of a carrot and a stick, doesn't it? And it has to be looked at with the intent of the legislation as opposed to the letter of the law. And I think that that's back to your earlier point, Michael, is about removing the barriers, right? It's not about it's not about accommodating an individual. It's making sure that their barriers aren't there in the first place in order for the accommodation not even to happen. So I find that very, very compelling. So over to Shawn and Jamie. From the survey results, a high proportion of clients with disabilities are not engaging with the job market right now. How can employers meaningfully engage with this community during these times?
Well, I'll start with that one. Shawn can add to it. I think, first of all, is to not give up on the job seekers, because as the economy starts to open up, as we get through this, there will be those people will need to come back into the workforce, right? They're not going to be able to stay absent from the workforce for long. I mean, how are people able to afford to stay home and in isolation, right? So I think there's some messaging that needs to be done, and probably needs to be done by the organizations that are supporting job seekers in their employment. You know, pre-COVID, we had a lot of candidates being referred to us with who are neurodiverse. That whole population has really just dropped off now, right? And we're going to need to get them back, and it's going to take some time and effort, and you know, maybe really good opportunities will bring people out from isolation again. But we're going to need to get through this phase. We're not there yet.
I think I just add that from the survey, we really saw, you know, anxiety, stress, concerns about exposure. These are all high on the list in terms of what we're seeing among job seekers as reasons why they're not engaging right now. So I think as an employer, it's to think through how you can communicate, how you're addressing that in your workplace, how you're changing up your recruitment practices, making that feel like a safe, supported process for people who might have some of these anxieties and concerns about their personal well-being. And then what are the right opportunities to bring people in? If it's remote work, and we're exploring that, but it might also be ways in which you can mix up the jobs. I wouldn't call them exactly accommodations, but even just sort of some of those adjustments you can make in the workplace that would make people feel more secure about coming in. Understanding there's other pieces. It's not just the job itself. It's getting to and from the job. We have a high percentage of our this population who need to take public transit. How is that? You know, how can we support them in getting to and from the workplace?
Yeah, I think Shawn raises a really important point, and there's one other thing I wanted to add to that, which is, you know, the employers who have established, you know, positive work in this space, a positive reputation, they're now starting to hire again. So again, I'll go back to Van City. There was a complete hiring freeze. They're now starting to hire, and we can see that our service partners haven't given up on those people who have disconnected from employment. Right. So when we launch our campaign, we can see that they're forwarding to those job seekers. Now, what we're noticing is more people are now starting to be, you know, we're getting 3 to 7 referrals for an opportunity in total, but we can see it's had, you know, over 1,000 opens. So it's a matter of continuing to get that messaging out that there are employment opportunities with these great employers, and start to build confidence of people again to apply for them.
Okay. Thank you. The next question goes over to Michael. Michael, why are economic and labor laws not sufficient? Can you identify the gaps and give your insights on how those gaps can be addressed? Another really easy question.
Yeah. No, well, listen, I think we've all thought of these things, right? And I guess with more gray hair, you sort of look back and see how things have changed or not. In my opinion, laws and policies, you know, it create a floor, a minimal standard that employers and others seek to just meet and tick off the box and move on. And we've seen this a little bit. This is also a bit of the argument in the United States with the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's strong policy, right? It has a lot of teeth and punishment, but it is a super minimum threshold that's seriously should be easy to meet, and it doesn't allow for a lot of the advancement. So policies create that platform, and I shouldn't say that they're not sufficient. I should probably qualify that and say they're not sufficient. They're not sufficient alone. So just having a policy and the legal framework creates the necessary, sort of first base. You get the first base here, but to round the circle here, round the bases, you got to have more than that. You have to have, I think, a bit like Jamie might have mentioned, you have to have that sort of, I guess, values, institutions, and ideas within the culture of an organization to say this is why we value it. Because if we had to create a law to enable an environment for everybody, I mean, we'd never get there.
No.
So that's my only reason of why it's not enough. And it's a good start, but it's just not enough. Honestly, in the next coming few decades, given the growing proportion of older persons who will present with greater amounts of functional limitations and et cetera, given the increase in prevalence of neurodiversity that Jamie mentioned, these policies and these values are probably not just going to be, well, it's a nice thing to have. There's not going to be enough workforce unless you accommodate for it. There's not going to be enough people. And I think about, William, I could go into all kinds of examples of how Canada has huge opportunity in terms of, mining industry. And there's just not enough people who are going to be in there. By mining, I don't mean necessarily oil sands. I mean sort of, nickel mining in Ontario and actually parts of BC. But there's just not going to be enough workforce to get in there unless we do this. So that's what I think.
No, it's a good point. We often say that to employers as well. If you don't start to get diverse now in your hiring and retention practices, you're going to be left in the dust. There's not going to be anybody to be able to help you move your mission forward. So good point. And Jamie or Shawn, anything to add to that piece about?
I think I'll just add that, BC Win was launched at a time when employers were, really in a situation where they were looking for that talent. And, this is an amazing untapped talent pool. These are, all the research shows that you're going to be recruiting people who are excellent employees, high degree of commitment, and to be that employer of choice and to attract that type of talent, I think is so important. So meeting a minimum standard is just not enough. You've really got to be a leader, and it'll put you at a competitive advantage to recruit that talent.
Good, thank you. So the next question is for actually flows really nicely from what you've just said, Shawn, and so go to Shawn and Jamie first, and then over to Michael. In times of economic turmoil for businesses, are there specific tips on how to present a business case for possible expenditures to accommodate those with disabilities? Jamie or Shawn?
Shawn's waving at me. I can see him. I know what that look means. Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question because we're in such uncertain times. I wouldn't be leading with a business case to hiring a person with a disability and putting out expenditures this month. But if it's the right person for the job, then it's the right person for that job. And I think that's probably the better focus. If there's got to be some grants and some funding opportunities that are available for people looking to make some accommodations. Certainly out here in Work BC, if there are any adaptive equipment requirements, for example, to help bring out that person's best on the job, Work BC is able to assist with that at no cost to the employer in most cases. Neil Squire did a lot of work in this space for years. So, there are some funded resources for employers that wouldn't cost a dime. So I always come back to it though, if it's the right person for the job, then this is and an adjustment needs to be made, then make that adjustment, because what you're also saying to the remainder of employees is you are valuing talent. It speaks volumes to commitment. You know what? It's easy to do things when times are great. You know, when the money's flowing and things are going well in an organization. These are the tough times, and it will speak volumes to your current workforce and future as well.
We often ask the question, how much would your company pay to accommodate Stephen Hawkins if you could have him work for you? And well, of course, right? So it is. It's about the value of your workplace. And in Canada, there is the National National Workplace Accessibility Fund that was announced as part of an initiative from the federal government, and that's a fantastic pot of money. I know that provincially, there are a lot of pots of money out there. Organizations get funding as well. The service providers that you were talking about earlier, Jamie and Shawn, a lot of them do have accessibility funding for accessible for actual accessibility, right? And I think that that's important to remember, because we often talk about employers feeling a hardship of accommodation. Well, let's just take that, like we don't even have to talk about that now, right? Like, let's just not even talk about that, and let's just talk about talent. So I appreciate that a lot. Michael, you were kind of moving around a little bit. Did you want to add anything to this?
Oh yeah, sorry. I am moving around a little bit because it's a little chilly down here. I'm kind of getting the engine going. Our HVAC blew out today, essentially. But listen. So let me add a little different nuance here, just for the sake of argument. So maybe it's dependent on the industry. So I'll give you an example. If you're a small entrepreneur and you're running a little cafe or something like that, and you've done well, you're in Vancouver, Vancouver or wherever, and all of a sudden, this has happened, right? And what some of our research is showing is that people with disabilities, we're kind of, in some ways, we've gone back a little bit into the dark ages here, where there's like, whoa, okay, well, if you're blind, if you have blindness, how do you maintain that 6 foot? And all of a sudden, if you're a person with an intellectual disability who might not have as much awareness around, PPE, then how do we, or some gaps in, and that affects business. So if you get into the seat of the employer here, you say, well, okay, this is going to be hard for me. So in a case like that, I think we need to mediate the environment, maybe financially, right? And I'm not a big fan of the CERB, I'll just be honest with you, because in fact, I'm not in favor of anything that just goes flatline across means tested like this, because that has nothing to do with equity. It's all just anyway. So, but for that employer that I'm just painting the picture of, imagine if there was some funding to really boost them up, then they could maintain that. Other industries like Amazon, or some of the big Air Canada, you can go up and down the list here, who gets federal funding to stay in business. It shouldn't be an option for them, in my opinion. I'm not a resident of Canada anymore, so I can say that, but so I think we need to get specific in the types of industries. The small entrepreneur is going to struggle with this. So they need help. They need different kind of help than the big corporations.
And it's such a good point. I know that the federal government has another pot of funding called the Enabling Accessibility Fund, which will provide half of a physical access point, so a door opener or a ramp or something that is physical. But it doesn't come, it's not a continuous intake, it's only when it's launched. And even then, so then you think, oh, okay, well, I can't hire Joe today, but I can hire him in 6 months when the funding is available again, right? Because I am a small employer. So we have to, I agree with you, we have to be aware of these things. So we've got a couple more questions, and we're good for time. Were there were there any specific suggestions that came up in the research? And Michael, I guess we can also talk about your research is on how to address safety and security issues for people with disabilities.
Yeah, this is an area of concern. So in terms of safety, you know, I could even just share a personal experience. I have a brother who has a disability who kind of recently retired, but lives in an assisted living facility. And so from a safety perspective, if I take the term safety kind of loosely here, you know, for safety measures, they really kind of, you know, clamp down in terms of who can enter and exit that environment. So that has an impact on people who could be employed there, you know. It also, you know, really restricts their ability to leave and be employed in some other fashion, right? The residents. So I think there's going to be some real issues long term on mental health here. I'd just put that out there. But on safety, it's hard. So, you know, I think there's a perception of people with disabilities could be unsafe. It's terrible to say, and it's not my opinion, but I think if you took 100 general Canadians, said, okay, they'd say, well, you know, I'd rather go to a place maybe where there is, you know, I'd feel more secure. So I think that there's perception that is going to overcome are going to be more important than reality in some of these. Security, you know, I think we should have been dealing with this kind of stuff a long time ago. I think we should have been incorporating disability issues in pandemic response. The worst time to plan a response is when the thing is happening, and that's kind of what we did and what the world has done. So I think it's just trying to get through this with like the fewest amounts of scars for our communities. And then we better think about this as a preparedness for the future. And by that I mean at the federal level, provincial level, but probably more importantly at a employer level. And you don't want to be sort of you know, prepping here, disaster planning, you know, by creating a bunker in the back of your house, but you know, you really got to be thinking about some policies. And I think that's where maybe SRDC and other organizations say, hey, listen, you know, here's some guidelines that maybe you could follow or something like that. And then I think that'll be the next step. Yeah.
Jamie or Shawn?
Maybe I could just, can I jump in, Jamie? I would just add in the mental health piece. You know, how people deal with mental health issues, and you know, we saw that as a key piece in the research. How each person is dealing with that, how they're dealing with it within their family, what kind of supports they have around them are so individualized. So you really need to understand what's going on for that individual. So there might be some underlying mental health issues. There might be issues that might really come to the fore through this pandemic. I know when I go into a crowded store, I get anxiety. If I'm dealing with that every day in a workplace, that's going to be that. I don't know exactly how that's going to have that kind of toll on me. And I think what the pandemic has really brought to the fore for employers is that mental health is such an important part of how we manage through a situation like this. So dealing with the personal safety, dealing with the workplace safety is just not enough. We need to make sure that those mental health supports are in place. People are comfortable talking about it. People are comfortable accessing them. So it's not just enough to have you know, that employee benefit program that you can refer someone. You really need to make sure that everyone's aware of that and everyone can support each other in terms of getting the supports they need.
Yeah, I think that it's an opportunity for future research as well to understand from individuals what their experiences were and what impact was felt on safety, personal safety, security. There's not enough there now. You know, like you, Michael, we had applicants. One in particular came to mind. He was employed by an organization, deployed to work from home, and in his particular situation, he has autism spectrum disorder, and so navigating Zoom calls and navigating, you know, those kinds of experiences are really tricky for him. But he also lives in a home where he kind of room shares with an elderly family, parents, grandparents. And when it was time to go back to work, he couldn't do it. because he was afraid of that exposure, right? That he would bring something into the home. And he wasn't communicating that to the employer. So as a result, there was a complete shutdown in communication there for a period of time until, you know, we were able to understand what was going on with him and reach out and provide that information to the employer. I think, so I think there's going to be a lot of lessons learned and absolutely need to be incorporated for, you know, next time around. Yeah.
No, it's a good point. Thank you. I'm just going to see if we have, yeah, we've got one more time. It's time for just one more short question. And maybe, I don't know if it's short, but can you please provide a couple of real work examples on what may be an equal situation currently in the workplace and how to transform it into an equitable and accessible situation? And I think that they're specifically talking about your slide, Michael, but I think that any of you could answer, could comment to this.
I've got a couple of really good examples. One would be, you know, the psychometric online testing. So the personality test that some organizations use, really tricky for people who are neurodiverse, just by the way that the question is these questions are structured, right? Do I somewhat agree? Do I agree? Am I neutral? Do I somewhat disagree, or do I disagree? People get stuck in it. So as a result, they don't do well. It's not a natural reflection. I think sometimes to be equitable, it means treating people differently, right? So when we know in advance a candidate has diverse cognitive abilities, an adjustment to the interview processes, the psychometric test isn't done. Easy, that's an easy one to do. But we think it's easy, but in order to get that in place, it involves a high level of commitment from the organization to be prepared to change that. Same as behavior-based interviews, right? The way those behavior-based interviews are structured, and I remember when they were brought in over 30 years ago, they were brought in because there was an abundance of applicants on the job market. It was an approach that helped hiring managers screen people out. So the way those behavior-based questions are structured, you know, can you tell me about a time when you did this to do that, person gets lost in the structure of the question. So when we know in advance that a person has diverse cognitive abilities, ask simple, straightforward questions. It's a much easier conversation. Or do the sort of show, do, review, working interview type. Those are easy adjustments to make.
Excellent, thank you. Shawn or Michael, anything to add?
Well, I think Jamie made some really good points there. Yesterday, we went to a Five Guys restaurant after skiing here, and what I noticed is, although the volume of people ordering in the dining room was different, like fewer, the people working in the making the food looked like about the same volume, and they were being expected to kind of do the same stuff. So they shout out, oh, this and this, and well, then you can't hear, you can't. So there's an example of workflow that had no modification, to me anyway, from my side of the gurney here, had no workforce or workflow modifications at all. It's just scream louder or work faster or just do more. And nobody could hear anything. So there's an example of probably you want to take a step back and think about how to make the flow so that the people are not dying behind the mask in front of, and that there's actually a flow. And so some good engineering principles would be pretty useful there, but they're just a reflection, I guess.
Michael, did they get your order right?
No. No, they didn't.
So there you go.
I complained, and I got a certificate for it too. The guy, actually, I felt bad. One of the people had a mask down below his mouth, but it was hanging on his chin. I said, dude, come on, right?
Yeah. We're a year in. We're a year in. Yeah, well, listen, we've run out of time. I'm going to pass it back over to you, Strap. But what a fantastic hour and a half spent with the three of you. Thank you so much. It was a complete honor to be part of this team.
Thanks, Mary.
Agree. Thank you so much, Michael, Shawn, and Jamie, for this timely discussion and on opportunities and also challenges that may arise for people with disabilities as a result of the change in work during the pandemic. We will certainly leave this webinar with a lot to think about. And Maureen, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your insights. We truly appreciate you all making the time for the webinar. A couple of reminders, the presentation is recorded and will be posted for free on our website along with the slides. And if you're a WWI or VRA Canada member, you receive free certificates of attendance. Immediately following the webinar, you will be directed to the evaluation survey. We greatly appreciate your input on our webinars as well as suggestions for future topic areas. Our next webinar is a panel webinar on the impact of COVID-19 on inequalities and work. It will be held on Wednesday, February 24th. All of our webinars are created for public access and supported by voluntary donations and memberships. Thank you so much, all of you, for your time, and thank you to our audience for your participation. Have a great day. Bye-bye.